Hello and welcome back to our action RPG series. Now previously we worked on abilities and debuffs, and before we go into buffing the character and doing buffs and their effect on our stats, I want to revisit our stats component and elaborate more on it and add more stats and start looking at how we do things like damage reduction on calculation based upon these various values. So let's take a look at the stats component and work on our stats. So before we go on to buffs, there's a quick fix I want to apply to the debuffs, and that is on the debuff poison. We need to set the lifespan of the poison, so how long is it going to last for? So let's say 10 seconds. And on the debuff parent, you want to go to the function for count like debuffs. And one thing I forgot to do was set the default local lifespan to a high number. This is going to be the default starting point where it's going to measure whether or not it's newer or older or whatever it needs to be. So I'm going to call this one set to 100 there. So when it gets to, say, here, we're looking at the one with the local lifespan. So we're looking at which one has the less lifespan left. And that means they're the oldest one. And that's where we set that here. So we just need to set those there. And our debuff will now work as we should expect it to. Just double check. And as you can see in the top right there, that poison's only getting applied once. Yeah. Each enemy. Okay. So that's all well and good. Now, working on buffs is slightly different because buffs are going to affect yourself and make yourself stronger, do more damage, all these various things. And we also have to deal with the idea that you may have equipment that also affects your stats as well. So increasing your armor, attack strength, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and revisit our stats component and prepare this a little bit better. So on the stats here, we've got things like health and strength, dexterity, intelligence, willpower, and resource. Okay, so health is pretty standard, what you expect it to be. Resource, again, pretty standard, what you would expect it to be. But strength, dexterity, intelligence, and willpower, these will be affected heavily by what we equip and the buffs we take. Now, there's two types of buffs if you want to think about it. You've got the more permanent ones where you're increasing a stat by a certain amount, and that's typically found in like equipment. And then you've got ones that are going to be more temporary, they're modifiers, so increased by 5%, for example. And that's what you're typically going to see on a buff. So what we need to do in here is track not only the temporary stats that are fixed values, and also the ones that are percentage values. So we're going to add a variable in here. Actually, I'm going to just duplicate the stats here. Duplicate that. And this one we're going to call stat modifiers, and that's going to be our percentage increases. So let me just set the default for these. So health we'll do, keep it as 1, strength 1, in fact let's set to just 1. Okay, so it will start at base 1. So times anything by 1, you just get the value back itself. But say that we wanted to increase the strength by 5%, that would become strength of 1.05. Okay, and then we multiply it by the damage we're going to deal, that's going to make it higher. So we want this modifier set up here. The other one is the actual stats and how we're going to affect them. Now, your character is going to have a base stats, and that's what this first one we made is going to be. So I'm going to rename that to base stats. And they are your base stats because of the level the character's at. So if they're level 5, they're going to have certain base stats. If they become level 10, they're going to have different base stats. Meaning if you took off all the armor, all the spells, everything from the character, what are they going to be left with? And that's what these base stats mean. Okay, and that's what we had originally with these 25, 25, 10, 10. So, as I mentioned, we also need a stat increases. So these are the stats that are going to be coming from equipment and other things like that. So, again, I'm going to duplicate our stat modifier. And we'll call this one, let's do this one as stat contribution. Okay, and these are all going to start off at 0. Okay, So as we equip stuff, these stats will the ones that can be changing. Okay. Okay, so that'll do there. We're also going to add onto here a couple of other core stats that can be used for various things. And some of the core stats we already got, like player level, for example. We're also going to add a core stat for their attack power. And that's going to be a float. And we're going to also have armor. And that's also going to be a float. So armor is going to come from your armor pieces, obviously. And that's going to reduce the physical damage you take. And attack power is going to be an evaluation of all the damage you deal. So it's based on all the offensive stats in our base stats we've got here, so strength, dexterity, but this could change based upon the class you're on as well. So if you choose a mage class, you may want to make it so willpower and intelligence are the ones that add to your damage ability. Okay, so they get evaluated to the attack power and armor, essentially. Okay, so next up we compile that. I'm going to create functions that modify and keep track of these various stat modifiers and so on. So we've got AutoStat already being used to change the base stats. Okay. Now, as I said, I don't want the base stats to actually change. I want them to change when they are leveled up. Okay. So I'm going to rename this one to Auto Base Stat. Proper capitalization would help. And then I'm going to duplicate that. And I'm going to do Auto Stat Contribution. And all we're doing here is going to change the variable that we're using here. So rather than base stats, we're going to change that to stat contribution. Stat contribution. And we're good. And I'm going to do another duplicate of that. Auto stat modifier. And again, in the auto stat modifier, we're just going to go in and just swap out the stat contributions for the stat modifier. Okay. Now, later on, there are going to be a lot more stats. These are all going to be based on things like dodge, critical chance, all these other things. But we're going to tackle those in their individual videos as we come to them. I just want to, first of all, just talk about how these stat modifiers will work in being used here. So let's go to my player character, for example. And on the player character, we're going to go to the event graph. Where are you? Yeah, let's go back over here. And actually, go to combat graph. That makes more sense. And in here, we're going to do the any damage event, right? And the basic thing we're going to do is evaluate how much damage we can take and how much we're going to resist it, basically. So now on the receiving end of the damage, we need to calculate things like the stats and how the damage reduction is going to work. So on our stats component, we're going to create a function which is going to be taking in a basic damage value, and then it's going to do its thing with the stats and output the reduced damage. Okay, so we'll call this one calculate damage reduction. And so, as I said, this is going to need the basic damage value that's coming in. We'll just call that starting damage. We're also going to need to know information about who is dealing us damage. So, for example, specifically their level. So the higher the level the thing is attacking us, the less we can actually reduce their damage by. So we need to know the damage causer. That'd be an actor. And also need to know the damage class. So damage class. And we'll just call that one damage, and you'll see damage type. Class, object reference, sorry, not class reference. Okay, so that's the information we're going to pass through over here. And now there's going to be lots of weird calculations we're going to do we're going to build on it over time. But let's do the very basic thing and take in the damage causer and getting the level of the damage causer, right? So the damage causer's level should be stored in their stats component. So every enemy should have a stats component. So we're going to take the damage causer, get component by class, and we get their stats component. And from this end, we can now go and get their level. We rename from player level just to level. That make more sense, wouldn't it? There you go, level. And so with this level, we now want to work out the difference between that level and our level. So we can take that level and we're going to subtract our player's level, the receiving level, and that's going to give us a value. So for example, if the enemy here is level 10 and we're level 5, there'll be a +5 coming out of this. Okay. And similarly, if they're lower, that would be like maybe level 8 and we're level 12. That's going to give us a -4 increase. Okay. Of damage reduction. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, we want to clamp this value. We don't want to go too nuts with it. So we're going to clamp that value there between negative, let's say 6 and +6. Okay. So that's just one part of the calculation. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to comment that out and just do level difference. Okay, that's the first part. Okay, and I'm going to convert it to a local variable. Level difference. Okay, that's the first thing it's going to do. And I'm going to put that into a sequence here. So it does this bit first. And I'm going to tie this up a little bit better. I'll just put in that damage causer right there. And we can just put that across like so. So how are we actually going to use this local level difference? So I've got the damage value coming through here, starting damage. And I can just search that here, starting damage. And I'm going to multiply that by a modifier. So if you multiply by 1, you just give you the exact same damage. But that value is going to change based upon this level difference. So this is now going to be clamped between -6 and 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to convert this to a float. Now we made it into a float. We can now divide this by 10. And then we're going to add this onto 1. So 1 being the starting stat. And we'll put that into the multiplier here. So let's just put a theoretical in here. So let's say the damage causer is level 10 and we're level 5. The difference is going to be the +5, okay, which is clamped, so still +5, and that's going to go to our local level difference. +5 divided by 10 equals 0.5. 1 plus 0.5 equals 1.5. Starting damage is now increased to the damage value. And that makes sense because the attacker has a higher level than us. Now, if that was the other way around, let's say he was level 5 and we were level 10. 5 minus 10 equals -5. Again, clamp just fine. And then -5 divided by 10 equals -0.5. 1 add -0.5 equals 0.5. So starting damage now is reduced by 0.5. And we're going to put that into a simple return node. Now, this isn't the end of this function entirely, because there's lots more we can do to this, especially when we take into account things like the damage type class and the damage causer effects and other stats too. But for now, we're just going to do this and output the starting damage multiplied out here. Okay, So I'll go back to my player character. We'll drag out our stats component, and we can now call that calculate damage reduction. I'm just going to plug that in like so. So starting damage is going to be a damage value, damage type is going to be a damage class, and damage causer is the damage causer. Okay, and that's going to output our value here. And the end result is we want to affect our health value. So let's take out our stats component again. Alter base stat. And the base stat we're altering is the health. And the change is going to be the return value there. But remember that we are altering it down because we're taking damage. So we're going to multiply the return value here by -1 first. And bring that into the change there. Okay. So now that will affect our health. Okay, so that's how we're doing the damage reduction part. And as I said, that is just the beginning of that. There's a lot more to go into that equation. But for now, that'll do. Because what I want to do in the next episode is move on to the damage increase based upon those stats. So we've got a damage reduction on one side. The other side is a damage increase being made by the attacker. Okay, so in this case, it could be the player attacking the enemy or enemy attacking the player. So we're going to look at that next episode. If you want to watch the next episode right now, head over to patreon.com/Ryan Laley. We can find that video plus many others, all from just $1 a month. Massive thank you to all my patrons and YouTube members for their continued support in their channel. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.